What's up, everybody? So, I made a video recently on common law, and I was explaining that the assembly and the church is common law. So, what I want to elaborate on is what churches actually were. And some of you are going to find this interesting because I'm sure that you go to churches. I just got done reading a letter between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson about what was called Platonic Christianity. For those of you who don't study philosophy, if you were to read philosophy, you would actually realize that a lot of the teachings that are in the New Testament are written by, or phrases that come from Plato and Aristotle. So it's interesting that, our forefathers seem to have made the connection between ancient Greek philosophy and Christianity. Also, for those of you who don't know, the New Testament was written in Greek. Just a coincidence, I guess. But what I want to talk about is what the churches became after the teachings of Jesus. So the churches essentially became structural pillars at law for their communities. That is where the philosophers came out of. So if you were to talk about St. Thomas Aquinas, and you read St. Thomas Aquinas' treatise on law, well, it's no coincidence that St. Thomas wrote a treatise on law, because that was the discussion. God's law, Decalogue, is written in Plato, and all individual laws or rights came from the teachings of Jesus and through the Decalogue and through the New Covenant and all that other stuff. So then you get to 1215, the Magna Carta. So in reality, the churches were assemblies, and the churches were where the philosophers and the common law attorneys. Now, Plato called them guardians, but attorneys, lawyers. Common law lawyers and philosophers were coming out of churches. And the churches were basically an educational institution of philosophy and law to produce a well-ordered and educated society, or managed society. So, in reality, if these were the churches of the 1700s, and then the Constitution of the United States was built by a group of churches, so you had Lutherans, you had Episcopalian, you had Catholics, you had Puritans, you had all these different denominations, essentially of Christianity, but also there's some records that show that they specifically didn't care what religion you were, just as long as we could not fight anymore or argue and be at peace. And that was essentially what happened. So all these denominations sent forth their best lawyers, common law lawyers or guardians and philosophers to create a republic. Well, then here's the question. How many churches in the United States have produced a philosopher or a common law lawyer, an ecclesiastical lawyer, which is a student of law, of ecclesiastical law? All right, there's no coincidence that there's a book of Judges, and there's a book of Ecclesiastics, which is the preacher, and there's a book of Numbers. The Bible was, these people were the smartest of our societies, and they were the ones that made it so that we could have a well-ordered and structured society with moral and ethical standards. And we don't have any of those now. And if there's no churches producing philosophers and no churches producing common law lawyers, then they're not churches. I don't know what they are, but they're not churches. Because you have to produce something to be a church, because that's where intelligence and that's where wisdom comes from, is knowledge. So, God bless.